Some of you guys, you were asking me before today about, Jeff Cooper and how the modern technique of the pistol. Well, Jeff Cooper kind of came out from the Big Bear leather slap, and we're going back into the 70s and looked at things, and they had competitions going, guys with like Thel Reed and guys, let me see, you had Thel Reed and Harry's and Jack Weaver, some of these different guys who are sheriffs and some are law enforcement, some are competitive shooters. But they had these informal competitions up in Big Bear, California, as I understand it. And Jeff Cooper, being somewhat erudite, he's very well educated and really sharp. And he started looking at it and said, well, this guy draws quickly. This guy's able to get recurring hits and control recoil. This guy gets consistent hits. So he started putting all together, and that's where he came up with, basically the modern technique of the pistol, which you can Google online and find out exactly what that is. And then he also added into that the .45 caliber pistol, as opposed to using a 22 or 38 or 9. A lot of the other calibers out there that you see today weren't even developed. There was no 10 millimeter and all these other fancy ones you see. Well, he kind of came up with that concept, and he starts Gunsight out in Arizona. And the guys that really proved that the modern technique of the pistol worked actually was LAPD SWAT, because John Helms and Larry Mudgett went out there first, and they were the first guys to go out there on their own dime, learn all this new technique, bring it back, and introduce it to SWAT. And I give them credit for making SWAT what it is. I was probably, I think, the third person to do that, and I started tagging on, and I went out there and started taking classes. And we'd come back, and we would impart what we learned from Gunsight back here. Now, this is in the 80s, early 80s. And at one point, I was invited to go to let's say 13 people called this 599 class. I think they've only done a couple. It was what they call Star Wars, and basically by invitation only. And they took the top shooters from all over, and they wanted to see how far you could push the pistol, doing all kinds of neat things. Well, Cooper gave ratings out. Like when you went through, you could get what the E-coupon, expert rating or something. I don't necessarily give ratings because I've seen plenty of people in my experience that could shoot very well on the range that failed miserably out in the field, and vice versa. So that's why I don't rate. Even myself, I could go on the next shooting and just, it goes 6 ways to Sunday on me, carts come off, wheels come off the cart, and it's just a big fur ball, train wreck. But at one point, I had to go through the shooting house, and they made a very difficult shooting house problem. And so I went over there, and at the time, in LAPD SWAT, we had to carry our revolvers with us, both off-duty and in high-risk crime suppression in uniform. The only time we could use the 1911 is if we were on SWAT call-ups or SWAT-related missions. So at that time, all of us had gone out. We had purchased the 6-inch stainless steel Smith & Wesson 38. It has Los Angeles Police Department roll stamped in the back. Collector's items, again. And most of us all had Hurst grips, which are collector's items. John Hurst is long since gone. Anyway, and I had a clamshell holster, which is, again, one of those is in the Smithsonian right now. So it was kind of a neat era back then, because we didn't have all the BS you have out today and everybody's bad to death. It was just, you were doing your job. So I went out and I sat down, and I'm on a berm, and I'm waiting to go into the shoot house. Cooper comes up in this four-wheel and gets off and sits down next to me and looks over and he goes, "Reitz, what are you doing here? What do you got?" I said, "It's a 6-inch, Mr. Cooper." He goes, "Colonel," I said, "That's a 6-inch. He goes, "Well, that's ridiculous. You're going to go through the shoot house with a 6-inch. I said, "Yes, sir, but that's what I have to carry out in the field." He goes, "Nonsense." He goes, "You go back to LA, go into roll call with a 1911 on, and you tell them why you're carrying a 1911. Now, I love the guy to death, but he just didn't understand the machinations of LAPD. I can imagine going into our Lieutenant Jeff Rogers, who is a classic, and trying to pull that stunt, and it would be god-awful what happened in the next intervening seconds. So, God bless his heart, but I say, "Well, thanks a lot," and he got on the thing and took off, and I cleaned the shoot house with a 6-inch revolver. But that's the way it was back then. And, the 1911 was coming into the zone. I had one of the first pistols that some of us back then had some first night sights on the pistol. If you look at my book, The Art of Modern Gunfighting, the pistol that you see in there is inoperable now. The frame that was shot so much, that's the one I actually used in some shootings, that frame has been, and it's hard chrome, and that frame is so tweaked that it's been cracked and re-welded, I think 2 times, and it now, you get a magazine and it's damn near impossible to get it out because the whole frame itself is tweaked because I shot it so much. So that sits in the safe, and it'll probably go to the kids, and they'll probably end up selling at a garage sale for 25 bucks, having no idea whatsoever, nor caring, about the significance of that handgun. all this stuff that you get today, and all the flash, and all the, you know, all the mud flaps, whip antennas, and mud smoke screens, and cheap parlor tricks you see today, that's where it really started back then. Was, you know, a bunch of guys who were dedicated, that you know, you never thought of teaching until you really knew your stuff. In other words, you didn't go and take a class and suddenly open up your own school. That stuff, that was unheard of. You just simply wouldn't do it. The very first time I was allowed, and I had been on for a number of years in SWAT, that I was allowed to teach a class to SWAT, and I don't even remember the topic, but I got up there for 5 minutes, and John Helms, Larry Mudgett said, "Scott, here's what you're going to teach next week to D-Team. So study it." So I studied it, got up there, did my little 5-minute presentation, and they spent, the two of them, about the next half hour just tearing me apart. Said, "Well, you forgot this is the wrong sequential order, you misspoke on this and did this," and I said, "Okay, I'm on the dark side of the moon." And that's when I really learned from those two how to become an effective instructor. And those two are probably the most instrumental individuals in elevating SWAT in terms of marksmanship and the application of deadly force that are so underlooked. But those two individuals, John Helms and Larry Mudgett, really brought SWAT to the forefront, which is why it had the reputation back then that it did and does today. And a group of us taught as adjunct faculty out at Department of Energy in Sandia Labs in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it was from there what we had learned and we were applying in actual shootings that were being taught to policemen that came from all over the United States, that was then being disseminated back all across the United States. So there's some wonderful other instructors out there, guys like the Stock brothers, you know, guys like Louis Arbuck and Robbie Barkman, and you're looking at Clint Smith. You know, a lot of these different instructors out there were all, you know, we either learned from them, taught with them, taught in conjunction with them in some cases. But that was really the genesis of everything that you're seeing today. And now you see a lot of permutations, you know, some which are just outlandish, just absolutely make no sense whatsoever. But that's kind of the genesis of gunfighting. And there are actually three, someday later in the future I'll talk about that, there are actually three different phases to gunfighting. Because gunfighting is very much a unique American experience. You don't get it to the same degree or historical background that you do in any other country other than the United States. Because you have the Trans-Mississippi West era, and then you have the Border Patrol type era, and that's where you get into guys like Ed McGivern, Bill Jordan, Askins, Skeeter Skelton, Elmer Keith, guys that wrote about it and studied it, and that was probably up to the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And then there was kind of a lull there, and then you started into the modern technique of the pistol starting in the 70s, and then the application and refinement in the 80s, and then finally getting into where we are today, which is a lot of bastardized versions, and everybody's claiming that they invented this and that. And I kind of get a kick out of it because some people say, well, you know, so-and-so invented shooting on the move. You say, really? Well, what, this unit? Yeah. Well, how long has this unit been in existence? How long has it been in existence? Well, the unit was formed in 1980. Well, I'll tell you what. Go back to Ed McGivern's book, I think it was published around 1919 or something, Fast Infantry Revolver Shooting, and you will see shooting on the move on photographic plates. That was in 1919, so we didn't invent it. It's been out there. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So there's a lot of interesting history to gunfighting.